Bonjour everybody, it's Mary Rowe from the Canadian Urban Institute, Institut Urbain de Canada. Je m'appelle Mary Rowe, and it's really great to start one of our first mobilization sessions for the Canada Healthy Communities Initiative with our great partners at Park People, who are going to be able to walk you through and give you kind of the highlights and around public spaces and access to public spaces. Really pleased to have Rachel and Dave and their colleagues on this call, on this session, and to have so many people keen on this. The program was just announced earlier in the week, and already we've had all sorts of interest and questions, and we're learning as we go. So just a couple of logistics things. Just if you just remember, you can see and hear us, but we can't actually see or hear you. That's why you have a chat box. So you can put questions into that session box. It's always great if you check in and tell us where you're watching from. That's always interesting. So if you want to do that, that'd be great. And then there will be questions in the discussion later in the session, which Dave Harvey will help moderate. So you can put questions in the chat and we'll sort them out. The session is in French and English, thanks to our beloved interpreters here who are going to speak every word in the language that you choose to receive it in. So if you go down to the bottom of your screen, you will see a little globe. It says interpretation. Let's all go there together now. And you click on the language that you would like to hear in, what language you'd like to listen in. Toggle that, and then magically, through the efforts of our translators, our interpreters, you're going to hear in the language that you prefer. And as you know, there'll be all sorts of opportunities to follow up. So if you don't get your question answered, it'll go in the chat, and then we will make sure that people get back to you to respond to you. As I said, I lead the Canadian Urban Institute, which is a partner of Community Foundations of Canada and several other partners like Park People to assist the Government of Canada in administering this program. And I happen today to be signing in from Toronto, which is the traditional territory of a number of First Nations, Inuit and Métis people, including Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And we're covered by a couple of treaties, Treaty 13, that was signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaty signed with multiple Anishinaabe nations. This is something that this program is trying to really look at seriously, are the equity implications of placemaking and of infrastructure that has historically gone on in Canada, and how do we now do things differently? How do we do it in a more equitable way, in a more participatory way, and how do we do it in a way that acknowledges the territory that we as city builders are engaged in, and how do we commit to taking care of the land and work in a more collaborative way with our ancestors and with our colleagues from different backgrounds. So the Healthy Communities Initiative, as you know, we announced it on Tuesday. $31 million investment from Infrastructure and Communities, the Government of Canada, to adapt public spaces in different kinds of ways using different kinds of approaches. And Park People has been in this domain for many, many years, working with communities coast to coast in terms of how to realize new kinds of green and public spaces and shared spaces. And they're going to provide some particular expertise to you to encourage you as you pull your proposals together. Remember, the proposals can be funded between $5,000 and $250,000. They're really a new way of looking at infrastructure, smaller scale, community-driven, community-led, and programming and services that communities come up with themselves. And so we're encouraging folks to reach out, work with different kinds of partners, not just, as we say, the usual suspects, but find some folks that you haven't necessarily worked with before. We want to make sure this program is available to smaller groups, particularly equity-seeking groups and communities that may not have thought of themselves as being in the infrastructure business, but we're here to say that you are too, you can be too. The portal opened on Tuesday. Community Foundations of Canada has an elaborate system for you to be able to, an application guide and a platform where you can get more information and submit your proposal. And the proposals close on the 9th of March. So we got to get going. There's a website, healthycommunitiesinitiative.ca, which I'm sure will go into the chat. You can find out everything you need to know. And then there'll be a second round in May. So we're trying to build capacity here across the country, get lots of people engaged in thinking about, particularly through COVID, what's the physical makeup of your community? How does that need to change to achieve the kinds of social cohesion, environmental benefits, social benefits, economic benefits, and equity benefits that these kinds of initiatives can take. So over the next couple of weeks, We're calling these community mobilization sessions, and all of our different partners are undertaking a session like Park People is here, hoping to be helpful to you and inspired by all the ideas that you have and that might take place. So I'm going to pass it now to Rachel, and she's going to talk specifically about what Park People's perspective is and how she wants to encourage and strengthen you and in putting together great proposals. So thanks for joining us, and there are going to be many more to come, and we're really looking forward to all that this is going to catalyze across the country as we work together to make better places. Over to you, Rachel.
Thanks so much, Mary. Hello, bonjour, bienvenue, welcome to everyone. I find myself on an overcast day in Toronto on the same territory that Mary talked about. Really happy to be here with all of you this afternoon. My name is Rachel Yanchishin. I'm a senior project manager with Park People, and really excited to be here for this first community mobilization session of the Healthy Communities Initiative to talk about some simple actions that communities are taking to adapt public places to create vibrant and safe, accessible spaces. So today we're hoping to share some inspiring ideas for adapting programming in community parks and other public places. So we're really here to inspire you, to mobilize, and invite you to participate in the program. As Mary mentioned, the Healthy Communities Initiative is administered by the Community Foundations of Canada. So again, any specific questions you might have about the granting program itself and how to apply, those sort of details can be directed to the Community Foundations of Canada. So again, like we are here today to inspire and mobilize grassroots community groups who maybe have never applied for this type of funding before, and really to encourage equity-based placemaking in communities that have been disproportionately affected by COVID-19. Un petit peu en français. Alors, aujourd'hui, nous allons partager avec vous plein d'exemples des initiatives fantastiques qu'on a vues dans les dernières années à travers le pays pour vous inspirer et pour vous aider avec des idées pour vos propres demandes. Après la session, nous allons aussi publier un blog qui rassemble les exemples dont on va parler aujourd'hui. Et nous vous invitons aussi à participer dans le chat. C'est une opportunité de partager vos idées et vous inspirer les uns les autres. So we'll be sharing lots of awesome project ideas today that we've seen in public spaces across the country. And after this session, Park People will also be posting a blog that compiles some of the links and the ideas shared today. And as for those of you who are at the launch on Tuesday, the chat window is a really exciting place to share ideas. So for sure, continue those conversations in that collaborative spirit, share about the great projects that you're working on across the country. So alongside myself today, we'll have three other Park People colleagues speaking with you. Dave Harvey, the Executive Director and Founder of Park People, Marie-Hélène Roch, our Research and Project Coordinator in Quebec, and Mash Salhemoum in Vancouver, Project Manager. So for those of you who are new to us, who might be meeting Park People for the first time, we help activate the power of parks to improve quality of life in cities across Canada. Our national network provides comprehensive support to grassroots community groups, nonprofit organizations, and municipal staff across the country who are working to animate and enhance their local parks. Our programs aim to provide communities with the tools and the inspiration they need to animate and improve their city parks. We also facilitate information exchange and peer learning between Canadians, as well as bringing innovative city park ideas and projects to life through new partnerships and research. And this year, we're excited to be celebrating our 10th anniversary of activating the power of parks. We have offices in the ground, offices and staff on the ground in Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver. And we have numerous ways that we work alongside communities. We have a network that's made up of over 900 grassroots community groups working in over 40 cities across the country. We have numerous programs, including a national granting program that works across 9 urban centers. And just we have lots of awesome online resources that you can check out, where we have guides hands-on guides to planning activities and events, ways to animate parks and public spaces. You'll also find there guides and resources on organizational planning, interesting case studies, and research papers. And we also have a monthly newsletter where you can access opportunities, resources, and events that keep you connected to the park and public space issues that you care about, as well as a fully bilingual national Facebook group of really cool park ideas, park groups. So we encourage you to get connected to us and stay in touch. And now I will pass it over to Dave.
Thanks, Rachel. And so just a couple of quick points before we start talking about some great examples of different projects from across the country. So just a reminder, as Mary pointed out, that public spaces create so many great benefits for all across the community. So that's environmental, economical, social health, and it's just so exciting to see the federal government supporting this kind of work in these kind of spaces. And it's particularly so relevant during COVID. All the projects we're going to be talking about today are great examples of animating public spaces, improving and creating new public spaces, which the program will support. But it's so important that these effects, that the projects you're putting forward have these kind of immediate important impacts, and particularly address needs arising coming out of COVID. So it's such an important consideration for the program, so that it's not just a great placemaking idea that you're putting forward, but that really need to show in your project proposal, how is your project responding to COVID? And just the other key point about, particularly making sure that your project addresses a need coming out of COVID. The second one is that your project really needs to take place on a public land, or it must take place on a public land. So that can be municipal, provincial, national lands, Indigenous communities, First Nations reserves. For an easy example, it's just it could take place on a city park. But there's so many other types of lands that you might want to consider for your project. So, for example, there's thousands and thousands of square kilometers of electricity corridors all across Canada. Great for exciting projects. This, for example, is the Meadowway project in Toronto, which is a 16-kilometer long new linear park that's connecting up different communities. You could propose putting something on a community housing land. So, many of the community housing neighborhoods have been disproportionately impacted by COVID. And there could be really exciting, impactful project ideas that you could be putting forward on lands in these communities. You could put forward an idea for using school, university, or college lands. And so the key idea is really be creative. Great, obviously lots of good things that could be happening in city parks, but maybe that COVID's really shown that your community lacks green space and that you need new park space. And maybe you can be using underutilized spaces or neglected public spaces that could be turned into great dynamic community spaces, helping to your community to respond to COVID. And actually, sometimes it's easier to get permission on some of these sort of underutilized spaces rather than a city park. And this is, a super exciting park project in Calgary that created a new park under an expressway called Flyover Park. And just a final note that projects aren't eligible that take place on private lands. So that includes lands owned by faith groups, anything that's owned by a private business, including privately owned public spaces, and also things like private apartment buildings, the lands around those community, those buildings. And we're just gonna go flying through here through a bunch of really exciting projects, again, right across Canada, that could be supported by the initiative. And again, it's really important to review the details of what's eligible and what you need to be focusing on in your application. We're giving a range of projects that we think are very inspiring. We're not going to go through them in deep detail, each one, but we are going to try to explain why we think that these kind of projects, some of them obviously happened before COVID, but how they would be relevant to this program and how they could be potentially eligible for the program. And again, really want to emphasize this idea of having the projects that are impacted by addressing needs that are impacted by COVID. Again, we're going to fly through all these things, not go them to, step by step on how the projects were done, but we're going to be creating a blog after the webinar that will have links to all the projects that will have a really good explanation of how they came together and a lot more background on them. And again, we're going to sort of describe how each one is relevant to the program. All of these create great ideas in public spaces, but we'll just narrow in on a couple of those particular elements that we think are relevant for the program. So this very first one is a super exciting project in Allen Gardens in Toronto called the Red Embers project. It was a partnership between local Indigenous organizations, Indigenous artists, and community park groups. The artists wove and created these different banners that were hung around the park, and it's really celebrating the strength and resilience of the Indigenous community, which is very significant in that neighborhood. And also there was an Indigenous healing garden, and so a project like this could be a very good fit for the program, because it's supporting a community that was disproportionately impacted by COVID, bringing the community together in a safe way during COVID, and brings links between different communities. And again, that's as Mary mentioned in the introduction, this program is really looking at how we can bring communities in new ways together, particularly with that strong focus on equity and how we can be addressing the needs of communities that were disproportionately impacted by COVID. On to the next. Flemo Farm, it's also in Toronto in the Flemington Park community. Really exciting initiative. So we've seen, great community gardens, and community gardens could be really good projects that could be supported under this program. But this was of a slightly larger scale. So this is almost a 1.5 acre garden that was done in one of those hydro corridors that I mentioned. So again, think about different spaces, how you could be doing that. And it was a partnership between a food security organization and a local public health center in Flemington. And again, project like this could be a really good fit for the program, because again, it was a community that's been disproportionately impacted by COVID. It's that during COVID, food security issues have been highlighted. And again, this would be addressing those food securities that came out of COVID. In Maple Place in Etobicoke in Toronto, they created a mobile food pantry that was just been done. It was undertaken by MABELLEarts, which is a community group that's been working in the area for many years to animate and improve the spaces in the community housing lands. And during COVID, food security has been identified as an important issue. They started delivering food to people in the neighborhood, but they actually had such demand, so they started creating this pantry with a couple of food security organizations in partnership there, right in the public space. So it brought people in, it provided them food, but also ways to connect together. So there's campfires, storytelling, music, art installations. So it's taking that element around food security, but also building that around building community, pulling people together. So again, a project like this could be a really good fit for the program, because again, it's a community that was disproportionately impacted by COVID, addressing food security needs that are rising out of COVID, but also bringing the community together in new and different ways. WexPOPS was it was a really neat temporary seating and native gardens in a parking lot in an underserviced community in Toronto at Lawrence, near Lawrence Heights, and with music programming, and was organized by a nonprofit and supported by local businesses. And again, a project like this could be a great fit for the program, because it's, again, supporting a community disproportionately impacted by COVID. The businesses in the neighborhood have been very challenged with COVID. So again, it's addressing some of those needs that have arisen. And this community also has lacked community gathering places and green spaces that's been highlighted during COVID. So, and again, finally, it's bringing everyone together. Just a note on this one. So when WexPOPS was originally done, it was done on a private parking lot, which would be ineligible under the program, but you could do it in a city-owned parking lot. And the Milky Way Indigenous Initiative is a really cool idea that's led by a local nonprofit serving an underserviced community in Parkdale in Toronto, but with the support of Indigenous leaders and facilitating. Ideally, what it's trying to do is facilitate access for Indigenous-centered intergenerational knowledge sharing, land stewardship practices, traditions, ceremonies, and sustainable food systems learning. And so it's this range of programming that's bringing into the park, both in person and during COVID. They've been doing a lot of that remotely and virtually at the same time. Again, so just to emphasize a project like this could be a good fit for the program because it's supporting a community disproportionately served by, impacted by COVID, but also brings community together in a new and safe way during COVID. This idea of virtual programming to make some of these things happen. And over to Marie-Hélène, who's going to talk some other projects.
Merci Dave. Bonjour et bienvenue à tout le monde. Donc, je suis située à Montréal et je tiens à souligner que les terres sur lesquelles je me trouve font partie du territoire traditionnel non cédé de Kanien'kehá:ka, qui a longtemps servi de lieu de rassemblement et d'échange entre les nations. Donc, aujourd'hui, je vais vous présenter 5 cas inspirants qui se trouvent à Montréal. Donc, d'abord, la forêt éphémère. Donc, qui est une initiative de la coalition des Amis du parc Jarry, qui a eu lieu début janvier dernier dans l'arrondissement Villeray-Saint-Michel, le parc extension. Donc, l'initiative était une installation temporaire, donc de type pop-up d'arbres de Noël recyclés, donc, et qui a vraiment insufflé beaucoup de rêves et d'espoir. Donc, l'initiative, en fait, a rassemblé 250 conifères qui ont vraiment, qui ont été apportés par divers citoyens du quartier. Puis, les gens étaient aussi invités à suspendre sur une branche des arbres un souhait pour le parc, pour les années à venir, et plus de 200 souhaits ont été récoltés. Puis, au bout des 2 semaines des installations, il y a eu un service spécialisé qui a pu récupérer le bois et qui s'est chargé de recycler les arbres adéquatement. Donc, on voit ici vraiment là, la nécessité, donc, pendant l'hiver, d'avoir une sorte d'animation, surtout avec le contexte du COVID actuel. Donc, c'est vraiment une initiative qui répond aux critères du programme parce qu'il permet d'encourager de façon sécuritaire l'engagement communautaire pendant la pandémie. Puis, l'effet de la forêt a été vraiment de créer une connexion humaine très forte à un moment où les gens en avaient vraiment le plus besoin. Ensuite, on va passer à SINGA Québec, qui est un mouvement citoyen ayant pour but de créer des liens entre les personnes nouvellement arrivées au Québec, entre autres des réfugiés et la société d'accueil. Donc, leur projet « Déconfinons l'espoir, une balade dans nos vies » a lieu en ce moment même au parc La Fontaine et ensuite continuera sa route au parc Jarry. Qui est une exposition photo itinérante qui est présentée en collaboration avec nous, les Amis des parcs. Puis, donc, ce projet, ça vise vraiment de lutter contre tout cet isolement de la pandémie et aussi, bon, le froid qui peut être un frein à sortir. Donc, c'est cette idée d'amener la culture dans les parcs et donc faciliter le partage interculturel et la redécouverte de nos parcs. Donc, les photos qui ont été prises par 3 femmes retracent leur parcours de vie, leur pays d'origine et aussi donc, leur arrivée à Montréal avec des témoignages autant à l'écrit en français, en arabe, en turc, espagnol et anglais. Donc, voici un autre exemple vraiment porteur donc, de comment on peut initier des mouvements communautaires et artistiques dans les parcs. On suit avec le cas de la forêt nourricière de Lac St Charles, qui est située dans la ville de Québec, qui est une première forêt nourricière sur un terrain de la ville de Québec. Juste nous rappeler qu'une forêt nourricière consiste à créer un écosystème nourricier, donc en harmonie avec la nature, qui va alimenter les citoyens, mais qui, avec le temps, va aussi nécessiter de moins en moins d'entretien. Donc, vraiment, chaque personne peut participer à cette expérience collective. Puis, il y a vraiment une création d'un développement d'une communauté et tout cet accès à une alimentation qui est locale, qui est saine, gratuite et aussi où on voit vraiment la création d'un réseau d'entraide très fort. Donc, ce projet-là, dès le mois de mai 2020, il y a eu vraiment une grande équipe, autant Agiro, Regroupement Action Famille à Lac St Charles et des citoyens qui ont procédé à de la plantation de pommiers, noisetiers, cerisiers, plusieurs feuillus et conifères. Et il y aura également un futur jardin forestier qui sera implanté. Donc, on voit que ce genre de projet fait vraiment donc naître beaucoup d'espoir dans un secteur donc, qui va devenir un certain noyau villageois pour la ville de Québec. Donc, tout ce qui vient aussi ramener dans le programme la notion des besoins d'alimentation locale, donc favoriser tout ça. Et on suit avec le projet du Carré et sa ruelle, qui se trouve dans l'arrondissement Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie. Donc, les citoyens qui sont derrière cette initiative du Carré et sa ruelle le sont depuis 2016 investis autour de ce projet de verdissement de ruelles vertes qui se trouve sur les rues Saint-Dominique, Casgrain, entre les rues Bellechasse et Beaubien, puis qui fait aussi le prolongement avec un espace de terrain vague qui s'appelle le Carré Casgrain. Donc, vraiment, dans les premières années, plusieurs personnes se sont mobilisées pour soit adopter une plate-bande, animer la ruelle avec des activités autant artistiques ou même de faire de la plantation de végétaux. Puis, donc, ils ont vraiment manqué, ils n'ont pas manqué d'idées pendant cette pandémie, ils ont été très créatifs et très résilients. Donc, dès juin, on construit donc, des bacs et on fait la plantation. Et tout ce groupe invite aussi également les gens à prendre plus conscience, à observer leur milieu de vie et vraiment d'amener à le façonner tous ensemble, tranquillement. Donc, ce qui s'en est suivi est une activité donc, d'atelier de peinture botanique qui a été fait en collaboration avec une artiste. Et donc, c'était vraiment cette idée-là de se rassembler à distance, considérant bon, les mesures et les recommandations sanitaires du moment, mais l'activité a pu se faire. Donc, encore là, on voit que ce genre de projet permet vraiment de transformer les ruelles en y ajoutant soit des œuvres artistiques, des murales, des plantes, des luminaires. Donc, ça introduit très bien là, dans le cadre du programme actuel. Et finalement, donc un projet qui est le Park Avenue Community Bake Oven, qui est un organisme qui a été mis sur pied depuis 2012 par des citoyens, qui est situé donc à Dartmouth, en Nouvelle-Écosse. Donc, en soi, c'est ce four à pain qui est collectif et qui crée un sentiment d'appartenance autour de la nourriture. Aussi, donc, le groupe a été amené à créer un jardin communautaire et aussi, ça s'ensemble dans un tout qui est avec un verger. Et donc, le travail des bénévoles de ce groupe a vraiment totalisé plusieurs heures, mais on voit que les gens sont vraiment attirés par ce four collectif parce qu'il favorise l'échange puis l'expérience culinaire. Donc, comment l'acte de manger, de se rassembler permet de vraiment être réconfortant. Et ça s'est beaucoup aussi illustré à travers donc, l'événement de l'ouragan Dorian, où plusieurs bénévoles se sont tout de suite mobilisés pour créer un repas collectif pour soutenir des gens qui étaient en manque d'électricité. Donc, on voit que ce genre d'implantation dans des parcs, donc de fours communautaires, peut être vraiment un outil pour rassembler les collectivités. Donc voilà, je vais passer la parole à ma collègue Mash.
Merci Marie-Hélène. Bonjour tout le monde. Hi everyone. My name is Mash Salah-Omum and I'm joining from the unceded territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations, or so-called Vancouver. I'm going to take a few more minutes to talk about a couple more creative placemaking projects from the West Coast, primarily from Vancouver. But so this is a really wonderful group called Hives for Humanity, who works with volunteers in Vancouver's downtown east side to create and maintain pollinator gardens and hives throughout the city. Beekeeping is surprisingly therapeutic, and the pollinator gardens also create great habitat connections for the city's native pollinators. Plus, you get honey and candles out of the process, which Hives for Humanity then sells through local businesses to support their ongoing efforts. The downtown east side has a very vulnerable population who was disproportionately affected by COVID. And while this work is always really important, during COVID, it's been especially the case as it helps the participants develop and maintain a sense of place and connection with their land and their community, and also with nature in an otherwise very urban environment. So this was really important during this exceptionally difficult time. Next, we've seen lots of organizations move their programs to virtual platforms and find new ways to create this much needed community connections during this time. And Stillman Society always holds these wonderful events, and they bring together nature education, community, and art from the beautiful urban Renfrew Ravine. And early on into COVID, they held this really great virtual birdwatching workshop called the Dawn Chorus. Sarah Ross, also known as Red Sarah, is an environmental educator, and she gave an online talk to the community about birds and their communication styles. And the morning following the talk, they asked the community to get up at the crack of dawn in the summertime, so really early, and they asked everyone to go to a local green space and record the sounds of the birds in the morning, so the dawn chorus. And everyone then sent in their bird calls, and they edited them all together and shared this on a digital platform so that you could hear the birds from the same time of day all over the city, which created this beautiful connection in the community while motivating everyone to go outside and using this cool, using technology in a way that I don't think we were using very much before COVID. Artists in particular, and artists particularly in the performing arts scene, was another community that was heavily affected by COVID, since theaters were almost immediately shut down. And the Vines Art Festival is another amazing organization that has always supported underrepresented voices in the art world. And they host this magical annual festival that connects people, land, and art in city parks across Vancouver. This year, because of COVID, they had limited registered spots for their in-person outdoor art performances, but they also introduced some innovative digital tech components that still brought together people with the land and artists, but in a COVID-friendly way. So Adriana Contreras created an interactive online map of the urban park system, which showcased First Nation village sites, important flora and fauna, while also engaging folks with the geographical history and the impact of art in the neighboring areas that intersected at the featured parks. So they featured 6 parks for this initiative, which also had accompanying sonic performances, which featured over 50 artists. And these were downloadable so that anyone could listen to them while visiting the park on their own. And these maps and recordings allowed participants to engage in a new way with parks, bringing stories of place, history, and futurisms all together. And these are really beautiful and informative and still available on their website if you want to check them out. Highly recommend. And then roller skating is making a comeback during the pandemic. And the East Van Skate Crows is a group of young women and gender nonconforming folks who all found each other during this time as they were trying to find new ways to stay active and follow the COVID health guidelines. And they created this wonderful group and encouraged other beginners as well to get involved through their skate camp initiatives, which made skating more approachable. And they encouraged members to check out new parks across the city and become stewards of these skate parks. And they even supplied materials and taught their members how to create their own customized portable skate rails so that they could continue practicing and developing their skills from any green space on rainy winter days in covered outdoor spaces. And most of these participants were all brand new or had never tried skating outdoors. And now they have over 60 members all learning how to build community and recreating safely outdoors together and moving throughout the city in this new fun way. And I think this group really highlighted the need for more undercover outdoor spaces to practice this alternative transport mobility option safely. And I think they helped address that in different ways as well. And one more, this one's from Calgary. Springboard Performance put on a really neat event called ContainR. This was a youth mural project that was adapted to meet COVID health guidelines, and youth projects painted murals on shipping containers to serve as outdoor public art performances and installations. And this was a really neat project as it helped address the demand for a need for having increased opportunities for the youth in the community to socialize with one another during this time and provide a meaningful contribution to the neighborhood. They've been hosting this event for a number of years now, but usually as one big festival over a single weekend. But this year they expanded it for COVID and they added a bunch more days to ensure that the whole community could participate safely. I have so many other projects I wish I could highlight, but I know that we want to save some time for questions, so I'll pass it back to Dave now.
Thanks, Mash. And thank you all of you people who are on. That's, boy, what exciting ideas being shared around chat. Really, really inspirational work and really inspirational ideas. And again, I hope everyone's looking at the chat, getting ideas from each other. Again, it's one of the great things we try to do at Park People is that we're not the, we're not the font of all information. We don't have all the ideas. It's about trying to bring people together and share their different ideas, things like that. And a ton of questions coming out of it, a whole range of different things. And in the next 24 minutes, we're going to try to go through a range of different ones. And I would like to introduce Alison Sidney from the Community Foundations of Canada, who's going to be on. There's a whole range of different questions we got. I've been trying to play around with them and choose a few, but a couple of really good important points that the webinar has been recorded, so you can come back and you can take a look through all again. There's a lot of information we're going to be talking about. There's a lot of resources that you can be using. So obviously there's the application guide, but there's answer lines, there's people you can contact with specific questions. All of this chat information, we're only going to have so much time to get to some of the questions, but it's all going over to Community Foundations of Canada. They're putting together frequently asked questions. A lot of the questions that you're going to be raising, a lot of other people's are too. So it's great. We're kind of the first webinar that's happening with this, so we're getting a lot of the first questions. But Alison, I wanted to pull a lot of the common questions are around land that you can do this on. So we've had questions about can you do this on community housing lands? Can you do this on conservation authorities? Could you talk a little bit about some of those land questions? And we can have a bit of a dialogue on this because I know we've talked about a range of different lands.
For sure. Thanks, Dave, and thanks for having me on today. It's great to see such high levels of engagement, and I've been watching the chat too. The questions are amazing. Bear with me. I'm a little bit feeling like I'm on the hot seat, so I'll try my best to answer the questions to the best of my ability. So when it comes to land, the programs that take place and the projects must take place on public land. So anything that is running needs to be done in a way that's accessible to the public. So when we think about conservation authorities, I think as long as their land is publicly accessible, that's the kind of the in way to having a project on that land.
Yeah, and so we've also had some questions that are some of those differences because we've had like, let's just say, again, that example of a faith group. So one of the questions from a faith group was, well, if I can't apply for a project on my land, can I still apply for a grant maybe to do something somewhere else? And the answer to that would be yes, right? That's it's not that they can't apply for the program, just the project itself can't be on that privately held land. I think It's kind of similar to that. Projects are allowed on provincial parks and national parks, but the federal government can't apply for their own program. Neither can provincial governments apply for that. So it's can be very confusing with some of these examples. And one other particular one I picked up on was it was a biological garden that was interested in perhaps applying for the funding. And would you have an answer for them of whether they could apply for a project on their land?
I'm not as familiar with that. What that is, a biological garden.
Sorry, a botanical garden. That was sorry. No, I don't know that botanical garden. Sorry.
Okay. Would that be a publicly owned and accessible land? Like you wouldn't need to pay to access that land?
Not sure. So again, that could be some of the parameters around it. And is the botanical garden a private, a private charity? Is it an agency of a city? So again, there's some nuances with this. There's some. It's important to ask some of those questions about their land, which is great.
Yeah, I think the key message is, make sure your organization is an eligible organization to apply. And then the location where your project is taking place has to be accessible to the public. So it's providing services or programming or improvements to areas that are available and accessible to the general public. So anything that is private land, you need to pay to access it. You need to be a member to access it. You need permission to enter the land. All of those would be ineligible. It just needs to be a space where anyone can come and enjoy whatever project you're implementing.
Great. And then related to that question, again, we've had a lot of different, to the point that Allison made, we've had a lot of questions on who can apply and are they eligible. And so some people have said, I'm just an individual, or our group isn't a nonprofit, how do we apply? And so with that, again, really encourage, so, people can do partnerships with other organizations. So you could be an unincorporated community group, you could be an individual, you could be a bunch of neighbors who get together. Just what you would need to do then is to partner with an existing charity. So with Park People, we do a lot of our programs and help sort of create those partnerships around that. So you would still need someone who is a nonprofit or a charity. So a lot of examples we put forward is it could be a faith group in your neighborhood. It could be a boys and girls clubs, Rotary, those kind of local agencies. Business improvement areas, they are eligible to apply, so you could partner with one of them. So partnering with groups that are already in your neighborhood, and again, particularly ideally, you're trying to partner with someone who can be part of the project. It's not just you're using their charitable partner or something, but they're actively involved in the program. And again, the program really encourages these kind of partnerships.
Exactly. Yeah, you've nailed it, Dave. And I think I just add, it's not just nonprofits and charities that are eligible applicants. We have a very long inclusive of who we can use as potential partners. So I'd encourage everyone on the call. I mean, I won't read through it now, but there's a long list there of organizations that you can partner with. And if you go through, you'll see there's a ton of opportunity, and we are encouraging people. So if you are an individual or you're not working with an eligible organization, to partner with someone that is, or an organization or entity that is. And as a part of that, it's really important to ensure that the activities that you're planning to conduct or the activities that your organization runs are in line with the activities of the eligible partner. So we want to make sure that everyone's working within their area of expertise, and with charitable organizations, that they're working within their charitable objects. And so as part of the application process, CFC will ask for an intermediary agreement for those types of applications. And so what that looks like is just basically a short document that outlines how your organization will work, your organizations will work together, and that everyone's kind of on the same page in terms of the tasks and the responsibilities.
Great. And another issue that comes up, and again, the good, great, Park People works in these kind of projects right across Canada, and these issues always come up. So this, it's and the good part is almost all the people who are on the call here, if they've done projects in the past, these kind of things always come up. And so particularly issues around public lands, an issue that always comes up are permits. So you will need, if it's a city park or owned by government or a different organization, you will need a permit or a permission to use that space. Rachel, Mary-Ellen, or Mash, do you want to talk about it's an ongoing issue always for people, but would you have any advice for groups that it can take a long time to get permits? Would you have any advice for them on how to try to work with municipal departments to get that kind of permission?
I can go first. I know the first event I ever threw in a public park, I started planning way too late in the game, and it was a pumpkin parade, and I had maybe 2 weeks, and they ask you to submit for permits months beforehand. And I just reached out to, we have park board commissioners here in Vancouver that are elected, but you could do the same with a city councillor. They're always looking for fun things to take part in, build community. I think they're dealing with a lot of complaints a lot of the time. And so this is a way for you to reach out, introduce yourself, and then by letting them know about your project, they can then help push along the permitting process I've found in the past. So I'm sure they wouldn't be too happy with me sharing that, but it works. So I recommend you pester your counselors to in moderation.
J'ajouterais pour compléter la réponse de Mash que je pense que la pandémie amène quand même des groupes citoyens, autant bénévoles ou un peu plus organisés, à vraiment miser sur des stratégies de communication. Donc, être capable de vraiment penser aux objectifs de votre dossier, puis de vraiment être en mesure de mieux le communiquer possible pour après être capable d'aller vers vos élus. Donc, soit des conseillers d'arrondissement pour aller vous présenter et avoir déjà en tête, là, c'est quoi vos besoins. Donc, une bonne préparation.
That's really good advice. I'll just add in from the application side of things. We do need to see that you've received the permits and approvals that you need in order to be approved for funding. And so I recommend that if you are thinking about doing a project that does require a permit, and you can inquire with your local and regional governments and to inquire about whether or not you will need a permit. But I would encourage you, if you're thinking about doing something like that, to start sending out those messages now, because they might take time to come through, and pestering your city councilor is a great idea. Using the connections you have in the community is always smart. It might be smart to kind of work towards the second round of funding, with that in mind, if it is going to take a little bit more time.
Yeah, and my understanding too, Allison, is again, because that can take a little bit of time for the application, as long as you indicate that you have been in discussions, that you have maybe, you could have, say, a letter of support from a local city councilor who says, I would support this kind of activity. You don't have a permit yet that you can show, but that by the time that you would actually, perhaps that you're could be chosen to do the project, to firm up the funding and actually get it going, then you would have to actually have the formal permission by that time.
Exactly. So we are unable to fund anything that doesn't have the permit. And so what that means is that, you'll want to indicate to, when you submit your application, that you're working on it, this is the progress. But we will need to see that it's kind of confirmed and approved before the check can flow. So that's just kind of the process, I guess, behind it.
Yeah, and another question that came up a number of different times was that, that a number of the projects we talked about, were very exciting, that they brought people together in new and creative ways, but that because of COVID protocols in people's individual communities, you can't do those kind of activities. And so the question was, well, could you do, would the program support virtual activities and things like that? And I know the answer is yes. And I wondered if, again, Rachel, Marie-Hélène, or Mash, I know you've worked with a number of community groups, and, we talked about a few different examples that have implemented some of these really creative virtual ideas that get people out in public spaces in new and creative ways during COVID. I wondered if you wanted to talk about any of those.
Sure, I can take this one. Yeah, definitely. The virtual and digital learning curves in our communities has been a steep one during this time. And I see it like also in the schools. I've got 2 small children in online school and all that. And one of the cool concepts that I feel we've become more familiar this year is, we say asynchronous. So it means sort of doing things at the same thing at different times. So when we talk about connecting people to parks and public spaces, like there's kind of this idea of there's this opportunity that many people can do at different times, not all gathered together in one place. But so maybe you have like a webinar or some sort of online event that kicks off the initiative or wraps up the initiative, and then throughout it, people are like interacting with those public spaces and parks individually or in their family units, and then also connecting about it online. So there's like kind of this combination of various ways of being together.
Great. Yeah, and again, with the examples, again, there was a question there about a lot of the examples, all the examples actually we talked about today were on were in cities. Again, park people, our focus is on cities. But again, obviously, it's First Nations reserves, Indigenous communities, rurals, towns, all those types of things. So it's all very similar. So it's not, these are all, again, different ways to get people creatively together. So, it's eligible for communities right across Canada, no matter what the population is. And again, sometimes it actually can be, in smaller communities, you can actually be a little more flexible. Maybe those permits are and permissions are easier to get. So again, really encourage those applications from all communities. And Alice, I don't know if you have any other advice around that point or.
That's a great point, Dave. Thank you for raising that. It's so important. We really want this to be open and accessible to people across the country in every type of community. So, we're thinking about people in the north, we're thinking about people living in rural and remote communities on top of those who are living in cities. If you are, representing a community and you're on the webinar today that you don't really know about some of the examples, maybe they seem really urban, I don't know. But if you're thinking like, how does this apply to my community? What are some examples? We did do some consultations with different groups and as we developed that applicant guide. So there are some examples in the applicant guide that came directly from people living in the north and from rural communities that hopefully you'll be able to see yourself in some of those examples.
Yeah, and another, not so much a question, again, we've heard different points, people in the chat haven't been asking, but again, it's these, great groups that are on the webinar that have been doing some of these projects in the past, lamenting, permits can take, months and months and months and months to get. Again, the two things, one is, again, you don't need the formal permission when you make your application. But again, encourage people to try to be creative. And certainly we're finding across Canada that governments are actually trying to be a little more responsive during COVID. Obviously, they're going to follow public health protocols in their communities. But, we are seeing more flexibility. Little things like, 880 Cities is going to be talking about it in their webinar about mobility, but little things. I know, organizations for years have been trying to close down streets for more sort of complete streets, active streets, and cities started creating a lot more flexibility and creativity around that. So maybe there's some of your ideas that are hard to do maybe in a city park, but you might be able to quickly get permission to do that in a city parking lot, or because, there's less cars using them these days, or in an actual city street. It could be, again, a more temporary thing that's going to happen during the summer, during COVID, but work with city councilors, work with get creative. I think that's our key point here is COVID has forced us to be creative. We can't just do maybe what we've tried to do in the past. And I think the program is going to really want to support and engage in some of those, test some of those new creative and exciting ideas too. And then what did I see another one here? Yeah, there was a question about Rotary clubs. It was a very specific question, but again, as it can be a national organization with a local chapter. And again, Allison, actually, do you want to sort of reference there? People can, it can be a local application or a broader application for different spots too, right? It doesn't have to be one specific application for one specific spot.
That's a great question. So the way that this has been designed is that we're looking at one application per organization per round. And so it might make sense for your local chapter to apply to their local region, and then you can have different local chapters applying to their local regions for their own specific local projects. Another alternative, there's a different stream of funding. So there's a cross-regional stream, which you can access when you go into the application portal. You can select that as where you'd like to go. And that could be something that a national or regional organization might apply to for a project that spans across regions. So, if you wanted to create a trail that runs across Ontario, instead of applying to each Ontario regional hub, you'd apply to that cross-regional stream. And so there's different approaches that you can take.
Yeah, and again, one of the questions was around, could something actually be a pop-up thing in different areas? Could it be a way to get people together safely during COVID that moves around to different spaces. Is something like that acceptable?
Yeah, I mean, I think if it's in one community and there's like different intersections where you want to have a pop-up crosswalk or something, I think that would definitely be an eligible project if you apply to the region. And then again, if it's something that spans across regions, but it's one project, I would say that would then go to the cross-regional stream.
Great. And again, I think related to that too, another question was on, could you be doing like something using mobile technology, like an app or something like that, that gets people out and active? And again, with one of the streams in the program is on digital applications. So I assume that would be acceptable too, and actually bring different components of the 3 streams of the program together.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, so there's the 3 themes. And so that would be, you can apply for a project that spans different themes. It could be a digital infrastructure and a mobility themed project. And you would apply to your region for that project. And I mean, I think in our applicant guide, we love to see all kinds of projects. It can be focused just on one theme. They can span across different themes. You know, we don't have different allocations for each stream. So we're just taking in everything that we see. And if it spans multiple themes, that's awesome. That's great.
Even better, yeah, mission together. So that's great. Well, thanks so much, Allison. I know I put you on the spot there quite a bit.
It's all good. It's part of the fun.
And I know we had some poll questions we wanted to put up to people. Again, the initiative's only, what, 3 days old now? And so a lot of these questions are coming up. And Allison, I don't know if you're going to be on some of these other webinars, but after a few more next week, you'll be able to just bang all these off, kind of thing. But really want your feedback on these poll questions. It really gives us a lot of helpful information. And again, there was tons of questions and tons of good ideas and points that came up. We all being noted in the chat. It's all going to Community Foundations of Canada and Canadian Urban Institute. It's all coming together. And so again, just we're going to have to wrap things up here now, but really appreciate all our panelists here. Allison from Community Foundations of Canada, Mary is always incredible to work with. I really want to thank Community Foundations of Canada and Canadian Urban Institute for partnering with Park People. Thanks so much to the federal government for supporting the initiative. But absolutely, most fundamentally, thank you everyone who tuned in today. And please submit some applications. It's such an exciting, cool program. Thank you for all the work that you do in communities, and particularly, it's just so relevant and important during COVID. So thanks so much for the energy and ideas that came out today.
Merci, bonne chance.